Good evening, community, in person and those online. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Board of Education to order. Can I get a motion?
I'd make a motion to resume open session.
Second.
Ms. Sonia,
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Ms. Fowler,
Yes.
Ms. Fowle, Mr. Davis, Ms. Jones. Here. Dr. Roberts, we have a quorum.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Spirit of Excellence for August the 10th, 2021. This month's Spirit of Excellence honor goes to the class of 2015 Clyde C. Miller Career Academy alum, India Fowler. For several weeks, India and our partners from Walgreens had been at the St. Louis Public Schools Central Office assisting our staff with COVID-19 testing. India, who is 24 years old, said the following of her experience. I am currently employed at Walgreens as a pharmacy technician. I was fortunate enough to be selected for the SLPS COVID-19 testing clinic servicing SLPS staff. I have been a part of this district for my entire life. My mother was employed by SLPS for 13 years as a family and community specialist, and I attended St. Louis Public Schools from pre-K through high school. I grew up in this building. It was great seeing my former teacher, Dr. Glenn Barnes, as well as my former principal, Dr. Michael Brown. Being able to serve my previous teachers and administrators over these past few weeks has been a refreshing feeling. Having such a personal history with SLPS has given me a passion for teaching children as well as helping others in this time of need. India, we are so proud of you and excited to see you serving your community at a very important time. On behalf of the Board of Education, we thank you and our Walgreens partners.
First of all, I want to do a special thank you to the AFT Local 420 district staff and partners like Bring a Book for a successful Safe Start celebration. Hundreds of families were vaccinated or received immunization thanks to our partners with Affinia Healthcare and BJC. 75 COVID vaccinations took place with Pfizer, ages 12 to 64, and 85 students, 141 immunizations were administered as well. We are also planning a second event, I think this weekend or next weekend, to do the same kind of thing in just around the immunization pieces. We also distributed over 800 backpacks, largely thanks to the support from former Board Vice President Susan Jones and her team at Holland Law Firm. They did 300, we did 500. And so I want to thank the persons who participated and supported the Back to School Fair at Gateway Complex. The Back to School Urban Expo, a second one, will be held on Saturday, August the 21st at the Urban League headquarters located at 4808 North Kingsway Highway, Boulevard rather. We are a partner in this event and are prepared to serve over 10,000 families with free book bags, school supplies, PPE materials, groceries, gifts, prizes, and vaccinations again as well. Obviously, our 10,000 will be our families, but we are partnering with any kid in the city of St. Louis who goes to school to make sure that they are prepared for school. You may download the flyer at www slps.org Urban Expo. For the 21-21 school year, we will again be offering one-on-one devices for all students enrolled at St. Louis Public Schools. Students enrolled in pre-K through 8 will receive an iPad with case and chargers. Students in grades 9 through 12 will receive a Dell laptop and charger. The distribution will be held at the students' assigned school. Each school will communicate their individual dates, times for pickup. And obviously, school starts on August the 23rd, the first day of school. I'll be talking about Restart in my presentation as well. Tonight, we have 4 presentations. We'll start with a financial report from Mrs. Banks that will cover June and July, followed by a detailed student support presentation. The board wanted to get some specific information about homeless and specific information about the kind of student at the beginning of this year in light of what's happening with COVID. The board did receive some information from us, and we'll be going over that information with Mr. Brown and his team. But let's start first with Mrs. Banks, who will cover June and July in terms of the fiscal climate of the district. Ms. Banks.
Thank you. I'm back. So here are our financial objectives, obviously full accreditation, alignment with the transformation plan, long-term financial stability, and high expectations and accountability. I'll review a brief COVID-19 update. Then I'll go into 2 months, both preliminary results from June, which will be fiscal year 2021, and July, which goes into the beginning of fiscal year 2022. So really the only thing I wanted to give on the update with the various funds is based on the maintenance of equity requirement that is required under ESSER 2. There has been lots of conversation nationwide about this new requirement. And basically what it says is the top quartile of poverty schools in the district cannot have reduced funding or staffing as compared to the base year, which is 2021. The potential issue with St. Louis Public Schools would be when we're losing enrollment in those top 25% schools. And enrollment determines both funding and staffing. So we've been working with the Council of Great City Schools, and they've worked with the U.S. Department of Education, and there have been some that have come down. And basically, if we can maintain an aggregate state and local funding at the same level or greater than 2021, then we will meet that maintenance of equity requirement. So we still have to run some numbers, but hopefully we will be okay. Here's our updated CARES spending. This is the original $10.7 million. We have expended all of the funds, as was the plan for fiscal year 2021. The change in this slide, you will note, would be in the IT costs, where we now have paid for all of the iPads and cases. So approximately 63% went to IT, iPads, laptops, hotspots, followed by payroll costs at 21%, and the balance to PPE and sanitation. Of course, our PPE has been augmented by many different community members that have donated lots of PPE, including the Urban League with over 650,000 masks, I think the Salvation Army, Ed Plus, and others. And we continue to replenish our PPE with recent orders for additional desk dividers, gowns, gloves, disinfectant, and thermometers. And those will be paid for out of ESSER 2. So the preliminary results for June. You might think that June would be complete, but we're not finished with our year end. I'll say that it is nearly complete, and we've had good tax revenue and federal reimbursements. A few more to go. We did have a $1.5 million Prop C overpayment by DESI in June, and that will be corrected in November. So obviously that will impact slightly our fiscal year 22 revenue. And we did receive some additional TIF surplus revenue for the convention center and several other projects. For the expenditures, we typically include items over 100,000, but June was clearly a very high month. So we just included items that where we spent over $500,000. So the non-payroll expenditures were nearly $30 million in June thus far. So June year-to-date revenues, we collected about $22 million in revenue, $359 million year-to-date, or 89% of the revenue budget. You'll note the local revenue, that's our tax revenue. We had some, the county revenue also includes tax revenue. Of course, our state revenue is some basic formula and transportation revenue. And our federal funds include large reimbursements from title, fresh fruit and vegetables, Medicaid, and summer food reimbursements. Our June expenditures, we spent nearly $46.8 million, $372.7 million year to date, or 90.5% of the expenditure budget. Any remaining expenditures we anticipate will be in the purchase services area, and that might still be an additional $6 to $8 million. So that's pretty much it for fiscal year 21. Another good year. As we move into the July financials, I just want to remind everyone of the proposed fiscal year 2022 revenues and expenditures, over $400 million in revenues and $395 million in expenditures. We do anticipate an amendment to this for the state and federal funds to include the full $46 million of ESSER II funds, where we had originally only budgeted $20 million. We also anticipate a GOB amendment due to the maintenance of equity considerations, prior year tax or fiscal year 21 tax revenue, the September tax levy, and higher building sales. There's a lot of budget detail on the website. This slide really shows the path starting from the main website, going to district info, financial and community reports, budget info. And I've highlighted the fiscal year 21-22 proposed budget. There's also additional financial data on this page. So for July, fiscal year 2022, there's certainly limited revenue, as we always anticipate, and the expenditures, excluding payroll, only had a few items that are more than 100,000, and that's basically our insurance items that are due at the beginning of the year. The July revenue for all funds, $3.9 million or 1% of the revenue budget, primarily all GOB. And our July expenditures, about $2.5 million, less than 1% of the expenditure budget. You'll see some negatives in some of the areas that would be credits that we would have received from some of our vendors. So we certainly anticipate that fiscal year 22 is going to be a strong year with the ESSER 2 funds, and we're making lots of plans for the ESSER 3 funds as well. And again, in September, I'll be bringing forth the tax levy for the board to vote on, which will impact our GOB budget. Any questions?
A few, on the page 5, I used on the CARES spending. We show that we spent 6.5 million. Did you say that we've spent it all, the 10 million, or?
Yes, of
It's
the
just not shown
10.7
here.
million.
In, on the presentation, they have the one before you made the correction. And so
Oh.
slide 5 is showing 6, which
I
was the
see.
original
Yeah.
amount
Oh,
before you made
Sorry
the
about that.
correction.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yes.
no
yeah. So we have fully expended the full 10.7.
Okay,
Yes.
great. And then the other thing is revenue is at 88.9%. Are we still anticipating more revenue to get to 100% prior to you closing out the fiscal year?
Well, we don't expect to get to 100%,
Okay.
but we do know that we still have some federal reimbursements that we probably won't receive all of them until December.
Oh. Will
And
you
I-
put those in 2021 or 2022?
In 21.
So you'll have to adjust it even then.
Yes,
Okay.
so that'll all be done as part of the audit, and all
I
of that
see.
will be included in 21.
Okay,
Yes,
so the fiscal year 21 will remain preliminary until the audit then.
yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Thank you.
Then my last question on the balance sheet, are we still at around the same amount in the fund balance that we had? I think 300 million or something. Do we still have around that in our restricted fund balance, or maybe
We,
unrestricted?
well, given that we're not complete with our reimbursements for the
Mhm.
year, we certainly anticipate that in the food service fund, we're going to have a deficit.
Okay.
But in GOB, we anticipate we're going to have a surplus. So I guess when it's all said and done,
Uh-huh.
we anticipate, maybe a $5 to $8 million increase in the fund balance overall.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Banks, thanks for the report. Could you go back to slide 10 and speak a little bit about the variances that are identified on that page? One under general operating and the second one under debt service.
Okay, let me find my slide. Please. Okay. So for the variances, are we speaking of the year-to-year variances for the fund categories? So the 0.1%, for example, under GOB?
Correct.
So now this was the original projections when we presented the fiscal year 22 budget for approval. Of course, there have been some adjustments. So for GOB, as an example, right now, we're probably anticipating about $293 million in revenue versus the $287 million of approved budget for fiscal year 22. And that's part of the budget amendment that I mentioned that we would be coming forth. So some of the biggest changes in I would say the local grants, those are the ones that hold a fund balance. There are non-entitlement grants, and those would include funds from the foundation and from Parsons Blewett, and there are several others. So a lot of that variance depends on how much we anticipate actually spending in fiscal year 21 versus what we anticipate for fiscal 22. I think we will come in close to 21, and for 22, that's our current projection, where we anticipate spending quite a bit more for early childhood education with the foundation funds. Of course, the state and federal, the biggest increase is due to the ESSER II funds, and we do anticipate increasing that by another $26 million, which will increase the variance even more. Similarly, for food service, during fiscal year 21, we were under the summer feeding program, whereas in fiscal year 22, we anticipate returning to the national school lunch. And with the plan to come back to in-person learning, that's why you see such a big variance there. And then with debt service, it's all just based on how the debt is stacked on the schedule.
Thank you.
Ms. Banks, I just have a couple of questions and welcome back. Good to see you. Going back to the CARES funds, speaking about IT costs. So were we able to buy all new iPads and cases for this school year? Was that expenditure or was that for the previous year?
Cheryl?
Sorry.
We purchased 8,000 new cases for the ones that we ordered last spring. And then we sold back 12,000 and we purchased 12,000 new.
Okay.
And the 12,000 have the broadband inside of those.
And I maybe stay close because this may be your question too. In terms of collecting the iPads, what was our success with that? And also, I know that we did have some payments that we required if people turned them in broken or lost them. How much did we collect with that?
So we have about 3,300 that are still out between iPads and laptops. We have a little over 1,200 charges that we have provided invoices for, and we've received about 42% of that back.
Okay.
And it ranged from a charger not returned, an iPad broken, a laptop screen being broken. So depending on what the issue was, it was a different cost.
And will the policy be approximately the same this year?
So the policy last year was $320 if the iPad was completely broken. With the new purchase of the 12,000, we're able to only charge the parent $70 if it's broken. If it's lost, though, it will be the full cost. So we're saving the parents money in that situation. The laptops will stay the same. If a laptop screen is broken, it's $94. There is no Apple Care with the Dell product.
Gotcha. And then, so the reason for the lower charges because we've got that insurance with these new iPads.
Correct. And we didn't have that on the 8,000, but we're going to go ahead and honor that with all the parents. So anything that's broken under normal wear and tear will be $70 instead of the full cost.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't think I need you for my next question. Also back to the CARES, talking about the 21% payroll costs of that CARES dollars. Were those one-time costs, contractor costs for payroll that we used CARES dollars for?
No, these were all internal staff. A lot of it was for the instructional support centers, and we had staff that were calling parents and different things like that. So those were internal costs.
So they were internal costs, but they were limited to that period of time. They won't be services that we'll need ongoing.
Correct.
Okay. And my last question regarding the TIF surplus revenue, was that the result of TIFs expiring?
Yes. And so the additional funds that we received in June, as I mentioned, were unanticipated. So I'm hoping to work something out with SLDC to try to find out further in advance. But yes.
Thank you.
I do want to note as well, since you asked that question, Mr. Davis, I did have a conversation with the new lead of SLDC, and they are scheduled to come before the board on October 26th with their entire team in the work session to give the board a full explanation of what they're doing with new leadership. Ms. Cousins made the recommendation. I reached out to them. And so they will be coming before the board, Madam President and board, to walk through TIFs with their entire team so that the board has a healthy understanding of what they're trying to do differently than what was done in the past, and to try to be supportive of the district in terms of the revenue. So I think that's a real plus that they'll be coming before the board for a conversation.
That's great, because if they didn't, I was going to suggest we invite them to the legislative committee. So that's wonderful.
In closing, Ms. Banks, you mentioned that the TIFs were expiring. What's the time frame? What was that time frame?
Well, basically, most TIFs have a 23-year life term. Very few close early.
And I just wanted the community to hear how long we have to wait for a TIF to close out.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Banks. Thank you. Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown. Again, the board asked some questions relative to homelessness and the programs that we were putting in place. So Mr. Brown will be coming, Dr. Brown will be coming with his team to walk through the student support side in terms of the mental health services. Ms. Marietta will be doing that, and Ms. Deidre Thomas and Murray will be available to take any questions relative to homeless and what we're doing as it relates to that. So Dr. Brown.
Good evening to the board and the community at large. My name is Dr. Brown, here to talk about student support. It'll just be a brief overview of the student support services. Then we'll get into students in transition, the social emotional supports, and then the any questions that you may have. Next slide. Just put up there the goal. The goal is to remove barriers from students and families to provide resources which will assist with students' academic success. So that's kind of our overall goal and mission. There are several departments that fall under the student support services, family engagement, social workers, nurses, alternative sites, after school, full service, elementary and middle school counselors, as well as students in transition, which you'll hear from in a second. So I'm going to pass it to Ms. Thomas Mary, who's going to talk about students in transition. And then Ms. Marietta will come through and talk about the social and emotional supports for the 21-22 school year.
Okay, greetings. For clarity purposes, Dr. Adams, I know you said questions. Did you want me to go through the slides? Okay. Okay, so the Students in Transition Office serves homeless and foster care students. The efforts behind our work are all centered around the McKinney-Vento law. It is a federal law that defines homelessness as children who lack fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. It's not or, it's and nighttime residence. The types of services that are provided is assistance with enrollment, transportation, basic needs, academic support, referral and resources, and for homeless awareness, to increase awareness, we conduct the McKinney-Vento presentations throughout the school district and the St. Louis metropolitan area. We also provide crisis intervention. We have a lot of families who experience death, domestic violence, house fires, and a host of other things. So we provide intervention, consultation, whatever we need to do to restore some sense of normalcy. And the delivery of service It all goes back to what we talked about initially, the enrollments. Any service that's provided through the Students in Transition Office, intakes are conducted as an effort to identify students. And so I know there were questions about how we are incorporating COVID type protections. And so we're trying to do most of the work through contactless, literally. And so there's emails, we conduct the intakes over the phone. And if families have the capacity to come down, they do so. And so even with school supplies, hygienic supplies, basic household supplies, we have what's called a needs assessment form. Once the needs are identified, we have a staff person that pre-packages uniforms, school supplies, household supplies, and whatever those items are. In terms of events, we did conduct our Winter Wonderland event. We usually host several events, but this particular event, it was pre-registration, pre-packaged. When the parents pull up, they give us a call and a staff person goes out with a cart to greet them with their order. And transportation. So what we've done with the cab companies in the district, we reference them as vendors. We've provided the vendors with masks. So if a student forgets a mask, they're not prohibited from entering the cab. We make sure that they're equipped to serve our students. The tutoring, we provided in person. We had tutoring going on at the Demetrius Johnson Charitable Foundation. There are parents that ask for support. And so I have had meetings and we're looking at offering these services via Zoom and in person when comparable or, when we have the capacity to do so. Home visits are conducted contactless. I know Pop in the Trunk could have several meetings, but literally our staff package. And when we pull up and call the families, we pop the trunk, they come out and get their items. And even with the home visits, we meet with them on their porches, we meet with them outdoors. Services have not stopped in the Students in Transition Office. People keep asking, what are you doing differently? Of course, we're being safe, but our goal is we never stop working, we never stop supporting families. If you have any questions for me.
Yeah, we'll conclude second presentation.
Okay.
After Ms. Marietta, then all three can come back and take questions.
Good evening. In student support services, we have utilized a tiered approach to supporting the social emotional needs of students, staff, and caregivers. When we're looking at a tiered approach of support, it's important to be rooted in what each level represents. Tier 1 is universal support. So those are either school-wide supports that are offered or district-wide, just depends on which lens we're looking through. Tier 2 is our targeted supports. Those are for small groups. And Tier 3 is our individual support. So when we are working with an individual student, staff, or family. Most often it's easy for folks to wrap their head around this concept when we're looking at academic support. And so if I was comparing it to an academic support like reading, all students are taught to read. That's a universal support. Some children, though, need additional support beyond what's provided to them in the classroom, and they may be pulled for small reading instruction with a reading specialist. That would be a Tier 2. Tier 3 would be the individual tutoring or one-on-one. So when we're looking at social emotional supports, it is that same framework that we can utilize. When we're looking at the Tier 1 supports, we've identified some of the essential functions. This is not by all means, a comprehensive list of what each role provides in the building. But in terms of essential functions to support social and emotional learning, and just the needs that our students and families present with, what we are proposing is that for the tier 1 level, that all staff are promoting that public or community awareness by maintaining a webpage within their own schools district website that provides community awareness around district or school events, psychoeducation, coping strategies, or any other type of information that would be important for them, community resources, when are our mobile markets, et cetera. When we're looking at social workers specifically, though, they will be providing school-wide professional development to all district staff on our suicide risk assessment and our harm to others risk assessment protocol, as well as some psychoeducation around behavioral health awareness. And then also professional development on mandated reporting, and in particular, how to recognize, respond, and report the abuse. Our school counselors will be implementing social emotional learning curriculum utilizing second steps. We are expanding that curriculum to an additional 11 sites this year, and they will be leading that implementation in the schools, as well as implementing the school guidance curriculum across all of the sites in the district. Continuing on with tier 1 supports is our family and community support specialist, who will also not only promote the community awareness, but also promote family engagement by advertising and promoting and recruiting families to participate in school as well as district-wide meetings, the monthly parental meetings and the PAC meetings, and any other workshops that would be germane to caregivers, as well as addressing and developing a system and a protocol for mediating parental concerns. Our full service schools are going to continue with their community partnerships, facilitating and brokering those relationships, serving as a liaison in the building, but then also with the implementation and the continued implementation of our mobile markets on Fridays, as well as some of our new grocery stores or markets within the school buildings, and really working to create cohesion between all of the schools so that regardless of where a child is enrolled, they and their families have access to the mobile markets on a weekly basis. And then again, the community partnerships. So really looking at identifying what needs are in those four full service sites and how do we fill in those gaps of service. Our collaborative intervention team will continue to provide tier 1 support to any school that requests it. So schools who are wanting assistance or coaching and consultation around school-wide processes to meet the social emotional needs of students can contact our collaborative intervention team to receive that support. And then we also have trauma-informed consultants in the district. Those are social workers. Those are members of our collaborative intervention team. They are also some of our embedded therapists. Those folks will continue to work with identified schools as well as district level departments to provide professional development, coaching, and consultation in accordance with the Missouri model of trauma-informed schools, and helping those schools or departments move along the continuum to become trauma-informed. They are also the folks who are often the ones providing the professional development or caregiver workshops, and they'll also be incorporated into some of our other small group processes at tier 2. We will continue to partner with Alive and Well for some of their training and consultation services as well. We wrapped up our grant through the Missouri Foundation for Health in June, but they were able to secure additional funding through the Missouri Health Board, Mental Health Board, to provide additional professional development. We've begun to identify some of the departments that they will specifically work for, providing this training, but then also we do have some additional hours that will be made available to all schools across the district during different PD events throughout the school year. And then to wrap up tier 1, we also have the behavioral health providers. So we do as a district have 2 full-time staff on board, as well as we partner with 11 community-based agencies to provide behavioral health services. At the tier 1 level, these clinicians often serve as a consultant to school-based staff in terms of bringing that clinical lens to how we are clinical consultants on our risk intervention response team. These are new positions that were afforded through a federal grant that we received. And these folks will continue to provide ongoing professional development for the social workers and the counselors in the areas of suicide risk and harm to others risk assessment, as well as they will provide psychoeducation for students grades 5 through 12 around behavioral health awareness. When we're looking at tier 2, these are our targeted supports. And with the social workers, this is where we have the introduction of the small groups that they will facilitate. The social workers will focus their groups around grief, trauma, development of coping skills, whereas the counselors they will also be implementing small groups, but it will focus on reinforcement of the SEL second step curriculum, or their groups will focus on academic, personal, or career development. With the behavior support specialist, which is also a new positions through another federal grant, we now have 2 clinicians that will be working with our students who are placed in alternative education settings, and they will be providing group counseling to those students as well, focusing again on resilience, trauma, grief, coping skills, and strategies as well. And then our therapists also provide group as well, both in-house and some of our community partners. Some of our community partners only provide group services where others will do a combination. And so we have additional supports entering in the schools through that form. When we're looking at our tier 3 supports, there's where we have the individual intervention. Social workers, counselors, and family community support specialists all provide individual support or case management, crisis intervention to students and families, as well as staff, as it relates to many different areas. Some of them bigger like bucket fillers for them are meeting the basic needs, attendance, supplying referrals to community resources. But then also on this level is where we see that individual work or individual supports for SEL. So therapy is provided, counseling. We'll also see our behavior intervention plans. This is also where the student support teams are meeting to discuss and create plans of support for individual students. Also on the tier 3 level is where we again have our collaborative intervention team. On the tier 3 level, the collaborative intervention team works with school-based teams to help them create efficient and effective student support team processes, how to have effective meetings, but then also can provide the coaching and consultation around observations, data collection, and the creation of behavior intervention plans, and also how to effectively implement those plans. There are clinical consultants on our risk intervention team will also provide tier 3 supports to staff and to students. The tier 3 support for staff will be this ongoing professional development around our risk assessment protocol. And so if an individual staff member joins the district beyond our initial PD days, or if an individual staff member has demonstrated that it would be helpful for them to have ongoing PD or training, they would be able to provide this to them. And this team would also be able to provide consultation to our school-based teams. In the event of an assessment, they could consult with the team on how to create a safety plan or how to implement that safety plan within inside the school. Also at our tier 3 supports, we have individual therapy. So we have that through our embedded therapist, through our community partners, as well as through our behavior support specialist. So that can be done for the students who are placed in alternative education, but then with our behavioral health and community partners, those would be services for individual students at those school sites where they are assigned to. When we're looking at what specifically are we doing in response to COVID, we are redoing some of the things that we had started last year. One of the biggest things that we created last year was a social emotional toolbox for students, caregivers, and staff. We created a kit basically that has a tab for each one of those populations. And on each one of those, there are coping strategies, behavioral health awareness, psychoeducation. For staff and caregivers, there might be some research articles that would help them kind of navigate what they might be seeing with their child as well. So to be able to publish that and essentially take some of that and add it to a wellness website, which will now be part of student support services, so that when families or students or staff come onto the student support services page, They can then access part of our wellness website, which would then have some of those coping strategies on there. There might be, for example, if it was a younger child, there might be a video that would show how to do deep breathing for little kids. So that's just an example of what that could look like. And then also we are figuring out the logistics for how to have a community rebuild unit. So Second Steps has a community rebuild unit. It's 5 weeks long. And we are trying to figure out the logistics of how school staff at every site, whether it's the counselor or social worker or a combination of both, could implement this community rebuild within the first, at most, 5 weeks of school. Some schools could choose to do multiple lessons within a week, but it really does focus on this return to school following COVID, how to reconnect with old teachers or old friends, but also how to forge new relationships as well. And then also, we will continue to offer caregiver workshops. Our most recent one is at the Preparing Your Students for the Return to School. We'll also be rolling out some Saturday workshops, hopefully. And we have already received funding through MHB to provide comprehensive grief groups to not just the student, but to their entire family. And so we'd be looking to expand that to either Saturdays or evenings. And we'll continue to offer small groups, not just for students, but for staff as well. Last year, we hosted resilience and coping intervention groups for staff. We'll continue to do that this year and also provide similar groups available to caregivers of our students as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Ms. Deidre Thomas, you want to come back up because I'm sure the board has some questions. Before you come back up, the board has several attachments. There's an attachment on the side that lists the homeless data, as well as the number of suicide assessment levels, district crisis team, mobile mart, and total student service, as well as a behavior MOU contract sheet, as well as Annie Holmes services sheet. So it lists all of those documents. You have 3 additional documents that are attached. And the last one is the eco chart that basically shows one school and all of the services that are being provided at that particular school. So I'll be quiet at this point in time and allow the floor to be open for the board.
I'm sorry, thank you so much, because that's a whole lot of information that you guys have provided. I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting a good flow of how it works. How is one referred to the program? Because I see you laid out the different services that are provided, but you do an intake process, but how are students actually referred to you all to conduct the intake?
I knew you were gonna ask that question. And that's why I asked Dr. Brown to include that form, but that's okay. So on the district's registration form, there are McKinney-Vento identification questions. So when a student first enters the district, on the registration form, it asks about their housing status. So they're identified that way. Also, students are identified through community referrals, through school social workers, counselors, FCS. Usually what happens is somebody will say, do you know their lights are out? And so it goes back to the definition, fixed, regular, and adequate. And if there are no lights, it's inadequate.
So if they come, so that's what I'm saying. How is it that one would know? Say I have a student or a kid in the neighborhood, and I know they're attending St. Louis Public Schools, and that's a situation, they don't have lights or they food or whatever. How do I, as an average citizen, get to whoever to make that referral?
So parents will self-disclose, students will disclose to a school personnel, school social workers, counselors, FCS, secretaries. That's how we know. And on the registration form, there are questions specific.
So say it comes to the secretary will kick it to you all for
Immediately,
intake.
immediately.
Okay, and then the other one you reported on the tutoring session at Demetrius Johnson. how does a child get to that? And is that the only location
No.
that we actually provide to?
No, that's not the only location. So usually I referenced our needs assessment form. On that form, it asks questions specifically to what types of supports are you seeking? That's upon immediately meeting a family or getting a referral. They self-identify the services they need. So we've had tutors to meet families in local libraries. We've had tutoring going on in the schools. Of course, services have been curtailed due to COVID, but prior to that, so no, that's not the only site. It's offered at school sites as well.
Okay. And you made a statement, I think something they will ordinarily know is there.
I agree.
So what other measures are we taking to try to reach?
So when I referenced increasing awareness, homeless awareness, so what we've done is we've made sure that posters are posted that are visible to parents, outlining the McKinney-Vento law. I go into the shelters, juvenile court. My goal is to increase awareness. And the more the public is aware, the better we serve students and families. And so those are things that we're doing. We're in the shelters, we're in the communities, and we are capitalizing on any opportunity or any platform to converse with children and families.
And the last question for you, how many community specialists does the district have?
That's a Dr. Brown question.
The family community specialists at this time, we have them in every school except for our Title I schools because they're funded through the Title I grant.
Okay.
And that would only be 3 schools at this point in time, Metro, Melancrod, and Kenora will be the 3 schools that would not have family community specialists.
I'm sorry, I told you last it was.
That's all right. I like talking about homelessness, and you'll find that
And
out
that's why I'm
soon.
asking, given that and what you've reported on your honest opinion, what are you finding is your challenge? Like what is preventing you from really reaching the population that we know is not being reached?
Wow. I think COVID, I really feel like I missed the mark during the pandemic because usually I'm out, I do a lot of television interviews during events. And as the school year started, I was like, why didn't I let families know that we were still in these buildings? And so we had our regulars to come for support and assistance. But I think I should have been a little more visible. So I blame myself for that. I think this year services are gonna look a lot, not services, challenges are gonna look a lot different. And I don't know if we have the capacity to serve that population. I think the support of the social workers, counselors, FCS, nurses, they're like our hands and our feet in the schools, but I only have 3 people actually processing intake applications. And, I just see those as the challenges, and I'm working with Tom Booth now to maybe put a video out there for families on Facebook or what have you. But I think families, when the pandemic happened, I don't think they really understood that central office and we were really open for business.
And I'm glad you said that. You said 3. So on average, what's your intake? What do you see the number of intakes you guys may have on a daily basis?
At the start of the school year, we can have anywhere from 50 families
in one
And
day.
so the challenge is, we don't have the capacity to seat 50 families. And so what we're doing is trying to get those intakes completed via phone, via email, via fax, and just trying to minimize, because a lot of homeless families don't have the capacity to run back and forth. And so we'll email the form to the school or whatever we need to do to minimize the stress, the financial stress. And so another thing we've done is, even with the immunization activities, we will transport them to get them to where they're going. And when you ask about challenge, I think about that. I think one cab company may have had 3 or 4 drivers to die. And so it's been kind of hard for folk to go back to work because they're afraid. That's one of my concerns. Will we have the capacity in these cabs to get kids back and forth, and how we are going to separate them in those cabs? And so we're looking at specifically putting families in a cab. And so it may impact cost, Dr. Adams. I'm sorry.
That's
And I-
okay.
Adams is, how do we, to follow up on what Tony just said, how do we leverage our district capacity to provide support to an understaffed homeless transition student support office?
You know, obviously this year is going to be a different year, and so as staff is requested, we'll accommodate as needed. Part of the challenge that Ms. Thomas and all of us are having is finding qualified staff. It's not necessarily having the funds to cover the staff, but having the people. So it's a human capacity issue much more than anything else.
Yeah.
And that's why she's leveraging social workers, counselors, and FCSs in a different way than has been done in the past. But if a request is made for additional staff through Mr. Brown, we will supply that staff. Our challenge is going to be able to find somebody to
Right.
support it.
Yeah, the cab companies can't find drivers.
And I just, one for you. Looking and hearing the report that you gave, do you oftentimes assess what you did the prior year, evaluate to see how and what you can do differently the next year? I know the biggest challenge was COVID. I really do get that. But how has that better prepared us for what's to come? Because we know the need is going to be even greater. And I see a lot that you all are doing with the trauma and things of that nature, but how are we actually gathering the data to ensure that we're actually reaching, those that need to be reached?
Great questions. So yes, we always are reflective and trying to take what we had and reshape it to something better, something that hits the mark. Our crisis intervention team is one of those examples. Last year, we had to pivot to 100% providing crisis intervention through Microsoft Teams. What we found is that it didn't really go well with students, right? But we had an uptick in the number of staff that then sought out the crisis team, which we thought this is a win for us, because in years past, we would go to schools and staff would say, I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. In this past year, what I saw is that we have found new ways to talk about difficult things, that we are now talking about things like how someone feels or how someone is showing up on a daily basis emotionally before anything else. And so I think that in and of itself, those conversations that have had to happen because of COVID are going to reshape the way that we do certain things. For example, the crisis intervention team, we're going to go back to in-person crisis intervention, but there's no way we're going to lose that virtual component for the staff. So we're not going back to how it was before. We're not going back to how it was last year. We're finding that hybrid of what worked well before, what worked well last year. How do we take that and move forward this year? We as a department for social workers are also changing the way that we capture our data. So what you've received from us before is basically like a count of how many children have we had contact with? How many times did we do something? But what that doesn't tell the story is, was it effective? Did it work? So we are creating a pre and post survey, for all of our small groups. So we will be assessing from the child or staff or parents, caregivers perspective. Was this group beneficial? What skills did you acquire? How would you rate that? And then similarly with our daily contact, we will be shifting. It was our topic of PD this afternoon, so we haven't fleshed out everything just yet, but we'll really be looking at kind of the bigger items. So the things that support SEL in particular. And although handing a child a pair of pants is an intervention and oftentimes very needed, I don't know that we'll track necessarily the outcome of that other than, did this child come back with the same need? Whereas with some of our small groups, the SEL curriculum we will be very reliant upon data in regards to what did we see in terms of outcomes? Did we see that there was growth in terms of coping skills? Did we see that there was growth in terms of being able to remain in the classroom? Did we see improvements in attendance? And did we see growth around them reaching their goals? We've been capturing that data with our embedded therapists for about four years now. And so we'll be looking to kind of take that model and transition it over to the social workers in particular.
Thank you.
I have a question, please. Does the district get involved in the medical needs of our homeless students? Just say, for instance, if a student is on medication and they're homeless, do you make arrangements in the school setting to get that student the care that they might need, or how does it work?
So the McKinney-Vento law speaks to medical support. We've had occasions where families couldn't afford to pay for something, and we paid for it. Everything we do is outlined in the law, the services. We try to set up where we've operationalized the law at St. Louis Public Schools. If it's a medical appointment and they don't have the capacity to get there and it impacts their education, we get them there. So if it's glasses, whatever it is, either we find the resource or we pay the bill.
Okay, and so in regards to that, that's wonderful. I'm sure a lot of people don't know that that's happening. But when it comes down to the advertising, just like my fellow board members, Joyce and Tony said, do you have enough in your media funds to spread out the love? I guess posters in the rice houses and the laundromats.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Regular folks where they go, gas stations.
Yeah,
kind of
so
thing,
so
so.
usually what happens at the start of the school year, social workers, FCS, nurses, if they do not have the poster to post outlining the services and the law, they come and pick it up from my office. So, and we make sure the posters are posted in the WIC office. If you visit in the community, you know, and even on the board, I know it was the SAB, but the elected board, there was a website. In the McKinney-Vento law, I was impressed. It was posted on your board.
Do we have when you talked about the cab service, and they're the first ones that would meet our homeless students, correct?
Yes.
So are they required or do they receive any type of training to be the first person to report any type of suspected activity?
So
that
I
might-
go out to the cab companies and
Mhm.
conduct an in-service with them. I meet with the cab companies at the start of each school year to discuss expectations. And so, yeah, and so we just have the conversation. So the cab company usually bring in all their drivers and I conduct a presentation with them.
when it comes down to cleaning the cabs, are the students responsible or the cab drivers, do they spray the cabs down when each family leaves out of their cab?
They're expected to clean it upon each exit and prior to the kids entering, students entering.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I was just wondering, we obviously voted to close schools a few months ago. And part of the agreement was that we were going to have more wraparound services and more resources for our students. So what services have you been able to provide? What increase do you feel that you have seen since that decision came down? And do you feel more equipped now than you did? I won't say last year because of the pandemic, but 2 years ago.
So we have been able to increase the allocation of the school counselors so that every school has at least one time full school counselor that will be in their building stationary. Also with our social and emotional supports, we are continuing to expand those as well. So looking at professional development. So instead of only looking at in terms of staffing allocations, increasing professional development as well, to be able to call upon, staff within student support services to be able to offer that. So in those ways, yes, we are beginning that growth. And I hope to continue to see that, over the maturation of the next few years as well, that we will continue to possibly not only increase professional development, but also staffing allocations as well.
So is there anything you still need that you feel like, might not be coming your way that the board needs to know about so that you feel that you're equipped and you have the resources to reach the students that we all know need to be reached?
At this time, I think I would reserve that to see the ESSER 3 plans and what we are able to acquire funding, staffing through that. I do believe we have a solid plan to approach this school year. And I'm hopeful that we are able to publicize enough of the events. I think that that's where I could use additional help, is in making sure that the community is aware of opportunities for caregivers to participate in workshops or classes, to be able to spread that word, would be the thing that I think we as a department will continue to focus on.
Thank you all for all of your work that you're doing, and please let us know if there are things that you need, because this is kind of the core of our student wellness. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have one final question around the transition plan. We know many of our families visit other resource avenues across the metropolitan region. And so as a district, are we sharing our transition plans with other entities so that they can indeed, if they're working with one of our families, they can refer them back to the district and say specifically, your district has a transition plan and these are the resources that are available. And I'm asking that question because I want to know if you're familiar with the SLU Prime website.org.
I'm not.
Okay.
So in terms of you reference exchanging resources. So the training that I conduct within the district, I go into the shelters. And so that the staff is aware of the supports. I don't know if that's
the question. I understand your outreach. The question is, are we sharing our transition plan that you're discussing tonight with other entities so that they can refer students that belong to St. Louis Public Schools back to the resources that we have for them?
Yes. So at our continuum of care meeting, and this is all of the social supports under the umbrella of homelessness, I share the plan. I share the activities, and they have the capacity to share it. I share the flyers. The continuum of care is once a month. It's all the social services agencies in the St. Louis metropolitan area. So the answer is yes. And Ms. Jones, I didn't know if we answered you. St. Louis Public has the capacity with the media. Like I said, I just failed to utilize it. So we have the capacity and the reach.
I have a couple questions also. it seems like you guys offer a lot of help, which is really great. Does the funding for all of this help come out of the general operating budget, or are there separate funds for this help and to increase those funds if necessary?
There are a variety of funding resources. You heard them talk about federal dollars, MHH, Mental Health Board, but the core dollars come from the district in terms of the resources. Many, McKinney-Vento, we get additional dollars for that, for transportation services. So most of it comes out of the general operating budget of the district.
Also, the other question I have is, and the reason I asked that question, if we're ever stressed with the general operation budget, how will that affect our kids? And that's something we have to make sure we keep in mind as we think about allocations of funds. The other questions I have, from what you're saying, it sounds like the kids are helped during the school year. What services do we extend, like on weekends or even when summers, when many of our kids aren't there? Because if you're traumatized in the summer, you're going to come back traumatized in the school year. And, kids could go back in their homes without the safety net that we provide during the
Right.
school year. So what do we do to provide services and assistance during those off school times?
I think we're both going to answer this
Okay.
question. So for the McKinney-Vento eligible students, I put together summer enrichment packets for the students that go home with them over the summer. We have so many partners under the St. Louis Clergy Coalition, Dr. Adams' relationship with the clergy. So they pack snack bags. And so families who are struggling, they're able to come back throughout the summer. So we don't work on weekends. However, if a referral is needed, or we need to be contacted, of course, Dr. Adams will contact you off hours and we respond. It's just that simple, but services doesn't end when school closed. We continue to provide physical support, nutritional support, emotional support, mental health support, whatever it is. So we don't get to turn it off. But a lot of, and I know you referenced the budget being stressed, we've had an outpouring of donations just to make sure there are churches that purposefully, like at Christmas break, they pack those snack bags so we're not worried about kids being hungry. And then we're still in this building. So yeah, we're here.
Do you guys have a program that are part of your strategic plan for your particular operation? Do you guys have something in that plan specifically for those like summer times and stuff, so that there's a specific plan to address times when students are not coming to school?
Yes, so for our students in the tier 3 who are receiving individual therapy, if it's a school-based staff member, we would then connect them well prior to the end of the school year to a community-based agency should the caregiver elect to continue services through a community-based agency. Some of our community partners who are embedded will continue to provide services all school year long so that there's never a gap with their current provider, which is ideal. So when we're also looking at those tier 3 interventions, it's very important for us to connect with summer school staff as well, the counselors who work during the summer school, to make them aware of any concerns, any suicidal or homicidal concerns that we had throughout the school year, making sure that we're providing that link to them throughout the course of the summer as well. We still provide crisis intervention teams over the course of the summer to students who are in summer school, should there be a crisis that would warrant that, as well as we offer workshops throughout as well. And we'll continue to do that this year. And I'm excited about being able to expand that to caregivers and to the whole family to be able to offer that throughout the school year regardless. But yes, most of our staff are 10-month employees, with the exception of when we hire for summer school and then myself.
I'll be quick. I just have a few questions. In terms of our McKinney-Vento students, the students in transition, are we able to track how many days they miss school?
Yes, I think that's a Cheryl Van Noy question maybe, but we are able to track attendance.
And in addition to that, are we able to track how often they move schools or move out of the district or move back to the district?
Yes,
And all of that stuff affects, I mean, I imagine that it's a significant amount for both of those.
right.
And all of that affects their ability to learn and student achievement and all those things.
Yeah.
I'm just asking just to
Yeah.
sort of drive home the point, you know,
Yes,
I mean, we care about these kids, we want them to do good, but ultimately, this is why we're here. And this really affects those things that we care about
Yes.
those kids. Another question I had was in terms of, you know, you gave us the list in this attachment of the behavioral health MOUs and contracts. Looking through that, it looks like most of those partners were unable to provide services or provided very limited services last year. Are they able to be at full capacity this year?
Yes, we will continue to deem our therapists through our community partner agencies as critical visitors. We will convene a meeting next week with our partners to determine whether they are going to be sending staff into the building. So last year, that was their decision as a community-based partner agency that they weren't sending staff into the buildings. So yes, they are welcome. The biggest catch with that was the requirements around one-to-one technology contact, technology-based contact. And so that's where we saw a decline in services being provided. But yes, I'm hopeful that this year we'll have increased caseload sizes once again.
While you're at the microphone, Ms.
Yeah.
Marietta, I'm going to try again and act like Dr. Brown and Dr. Adams aren't in the room. But you mentioned a very diplomatic answer about looking at the ESSER 3 funds and how that's going to impact your department. And we're going to hear a presentation about that, and we're going to have to make decisions about that soon. Would you be willing to sort of just give us a brief outline of what you're looking for from ESSER 3 to help you and your staff do your job?
Well, there's a lot of things that we put in there, but I think some of the biggest bucket items are an expansion of the SEL curriculum to where we are expanding that to every school site, to where we are partnering with the academic office to lead implementation with our teaching staff so that it's not just a service coming from counselor or social worker going to the students, that it is something that all teaching staff are involved in as well, so that they're receiving that psychoeducation and can be delivering it in partnership with their students. So expanding that curriculum to all sites will address our transient student population as well as our transient staff population, looking at bringing restorative practices, restorative justice, professional development, and then implementation of that in our buildings as well. And then looking at an electronic medical records as we continue to increase our expansion of psychotherapy. I think traditionally we've looked at school social workers through the lens of, yes, they are mental health professionals, but we still have them doing some tasks that don't really fall into that. And as I work to increase their skill capacity to be able to deliver more of the mental health services, I think an electronic medical records will be crucial, as well as exploring Medicaid billing as a district to tap into a revenue stream that we haven't yet before, with the hopes that we could continue to add some positions directly related to clinical services in-house, as opposed to always relying on community partners to fill that gap, because we know that we're still not filling that gap yet. There are still many children and families that could benefit from services. So increasing some of that internal capacity would be really, it would be a huge win for us. And I think ultimately for our students and families. So that's just some of it.
Well, those are two and a half great things. So good.
Thanks.
I have one final question, and I'm trying to get Dr. Brown to say something because he's been way too quiet. But on our agenda to approve tonight, which kind of even spurred this whole conversation. I'm so grateful you guys are here. But it was an MOU with the St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Commission. And it sounds like this is our initial agreement with them. Could you talk a little bit about, come on, talk a little bit about your partnership with them, how that came about, and what you expect from that partnership?
So the partnership came about, and as a matter of fact, Ms. Marietta is the spearheading that. They said all good leaders like Dr. Adams, you get great people around you. That's how you become good. But that started with the mental health board, having a conversation with Ms. Muhammad and her team over there, as well as working with the police department. We've always worked with the police department as far as our crisis team. So when something happens in the community, we get a lot of referrals from them. And then we dispatch our crisis team. Sometimes we get a call at 3 a.m. from Dr. Adams or saying that this happened at a school and we have to be there before school starts. And so the relationship started in that manner, but now we're expanding it to not only students that were critically injured, but just students who were around. So if a house fire happened or, God forbid, a shooting happened in a neighborhood and a kid witnessed it, now we're able to service that kid as well as a kid that was affected by it. So it's kind of a wraparound of services with them. So it's a great partnership and we're really looking forward to it and even expanding it a little bit more as I've talked to Colonel Davis about some other things that we're going to try to do when things happen in the community. How do we respond to our kids who come to school the next morning? Because a lot of times we do not know unless I read the paper every day to make sure, but this is a service that will help us really capture those kids who experience things at night that we don't know about.
Well, thank you. And I'm so glad for that because I've looked at that list before of the coalition and it's supposed to be helping kids and our name was never on it. So I'm very glad that our name's going to be on it because I think that's very important. So thank you all very much.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. This
I'll explain.
chart.
Yes.
So I understand it, but I think my question is, and I think it goes back to what was asked before, to see first, how are these services brought to this particular school? I know it's different for other schools, but is it of the request of the principal? Is it, how are you identifying these particular organizations to come into this school?
So, and I'll let Ms. Marietta go as well, but principals broker those relationships. Many of them are aggressive in terms of getting resources. And that's why you see a lot. Sometimes the partner wants to go to a particular school in the neighborhood. And so they make the request of us. We really want to be in this school. They have some relationships in the community. And so it's twofold. Sometimes we get grants and we'll sit down and discuss this school doesn't have this service. So it's really multifaceted, but mainly the principal does the driving in this. They really want to have this service and really good principals. Well, I take that back. Principals who are really aggressive, really solicit the services to be brought to their schools. And then they know how to navigate and use it because many principals don't know. That's a lot of services that you're looking at. And so how do you navigate that? Sometimes you have to use your FCS, your academic coach to be assistant principal. Everybody plays a part in trying to get the services in to support kids.
And I get that, but this is where I am. I guess because I'm so engaged when it comes to the kids, which we all are. You guys are doing an excellent job. But my question is there assessments done to say Grace Hill was impactful, Grace Hill has done right by the kids, we will continue those services, or you know what, and I'm just using, just so Grace Hill know I'm not attacking them, I just see Grace Hill in my neck, in my face, but you know what, this isn't working, Grace Hill, you're doing a disservice to my students or to this district, and are we really managing and assessing that?
So for those, let's make sure we say Grace Hill. Grace Hill is one of our best partners. So I want to make
That's what I'm saying. It
I want to
just
make
happened to
sure
come in my
that
face.
I want to amen that.
Maybe I
okay?
should have said St. Louis, please. No, I
Yeah,
can't say
please don't
that.
say Grace Hill.
So Grace
Yes.
Hill is one of those that we have MOU and a contract. As a matter of fact, you guys approved it, I think, 2 board meetings ago. And so we have data around that. They service a lot of our transient population. They're able to do things that we cannot do when we partner with them, as far as helping with attendance, making sure that students are getting to school. We're not able to put students in our cars. So they are able to do things like that. They're also able to get parents to doctor visits, making sure kids are getting to doctor visits. So we have data around all of those that have MOUs with us, and we can share that at any time.
No, I don't want it. I'm
No,
just wanting to make sure,
Oh, yeah.
it's like, it looks good, like Dr. Adams said, this is a lot of services, but is it impactful?
Beneficial. So
is
the
what
ones that
I'm
have
saying.
MOUs with us, yes, we have data for the volunteers. The schools probably have that data at their sites.
Yeah, just to be clear, the board approves the MOUs at every board meeting, and there's backup data, and we don't bring you back MOUs the following year if we don't think it's substantial enough. As Ms. Marietta indicated, last year was a wash for everybody. So you're not gonna have any data for last year.
Gracell did
but
a great
outside-
job last year.
Okay.
Behavioral health partners.
Okay, but outside of that, that's how we look at the data. We do look at the data and determine if we need to re-up this MOU again, because it is technically a contract that the board is approving. Thank you very much.
Oh, I didn't go yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Sanya. I apologize. I didn't see you.
Okay. I'm gonna try not to repeat anything that's been said. So my first question, I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So you were saying that when the students or the families register, there's an initial intake, some questions there that will trigger your involvement, right?
Yeah, on the district's registration form.
Okay, I was wanting to make sure I understood that.
Yes,
correctly.
ma'am.
Okay. And then I think my next question was around, so you mentioned that we had 2 clinicians full-time, but then you came back and said that we have, you were able to have someone in every school?
Those are the school counselors. They are not our clinicians. So the school counselors are full-time, at least one in every building. Some have 2 or more. But in terms of full-time clinicians, we have 2 that are employed by the district. That's solely their job, is to provide clinical intervention to students.
Okay, and then you mentioned too, well, let me just follow up on that clinician question. So the clinicians, they kind of go school to school based off the need and provide services? And are they doing psychotherapy services? Are they letting you know we should pull in this partner? I'm just want to know more about their relationship. And
Sure.
how we're
So they are actually assigned 2 schools. One is assigned this year full-time to Ashland, and the other one is assigned split between Warner and Hamilton, and they provide direct psychotherapy. So both are licensed, so they provide the direct work. They work with the school-based teams to, identify children as possible referrals for service. They then work on garnering the consent from the caregiver. They also do an assessment to ensure that their clinical services are most appropriate for this child. And in the event to where their caseload would be deemed full, then they would work with school-based staff on identifying a community-based partner to refer the family and the child to.
And is that when you pull in those 11 collaborative partners, do they come into place there?
Well, we try to equitably distribute our partners throughout. So what we do is look for schools who don't have other community partners on the ECO map already and try to identify those as sites. We also look at other data around our suicide risk assessment data. We look at what are the trauma, figures for that particular area or for that particular zip code. So we try not to have a community partner in a building with one of our clinicians already. And I even try to be more cognizant. I have other social workers who are also licensed, who we have been doing professional development with them over the last 3-4 years on their psychotherapy. So again, if I have one of those social workers who will do psychotherapy on a smaller scale because they are fulfilling the role as a school social worker as well, I would then also try to be very cognizant of their community partners. But as Dr. Adams mentioned, some of the partnerships have been in place for years, either because the principal was able to outreach or their team, or because the community partner has a specific tie to that school, whether it's relationships, or it could be that their funding is very particular about a zip code or a particular area, like Chief Hayden's rectangle is often, a zone that is identified. And so we always try to have that equitable distribution of services, though, while looking at the data. What are the needs that the school has identified? Is this a school that tends to have a high rate of loss? One of our elementary schools, Warner, for example, has continuously had a lot of loss as related to caregivers. And so making sure that we have a clinician in the building to meet that need would be important.
Okay, and then, so those clinicians, those collaborative community partners, I know we talked a lot about psychotherapy. I know there's a lot of limitations, but are there instances where they deem that there is, I think as Ms. Jones was mentioning earlier, like some psychiatric attention needed? Is there, or have you found that some of them are saying that that's a need, and do we have anything in place to help the students get connected to that when that's identified?
We do. So we identify that not only through our clinicians and through our community partners, but also through our social workers and counselors who are the administrators of our suicide risk and harm to others assessments. And in those cases, we do have a protocol and an assessment tool that we use. And if any of those needs are identified, then we either connect them with a community resource such as BHR, which we do have an MOU with, or through another community referral agency. And then we would always be very concerned about how immediate is the safety concern or safety risk, either for the child themselves or for anyone else in the community, and then make recommendations based on that in terms of high risk or low risk.
Okay. And then I know you mentioned that for tier 3, we have around staff, there's a lot of professional development options for them, which I think is great. Do we have anything, like if staff wanted to access psychotherapy themselves, or if they were just needing help, do we have anything, outside of necessarily professional development, just for their own?
Yes,
mental-
sure, absolutely. So at the tier 3 level, we have our employee assistance program through United Healthcare that we would connect staff with. Anytime we go out for a crisis, we are also sharing information about the district's EAP to promote that and to make sure that staff are aware of that as a resource. Looking at tier 2, last year is when we provided the RCI groups for staff. And that was generally the modality that we used with staff, just so that they were coming together around a shared experience as opposed to it being like individual psychotherapy.
Okay. And then I know that not you, but someone else mentioned just like actually this might have been you, comprehensive groups for students and families.
Yes.
And I know you mentioned kind of wanting to publicize that more. How was the attendance for those groups when we were offering them?
So this will be the first year that we're offering them. Staff completed the training last winter through the spring. And this will be the first year that we offer it to the entire family. So I guess TBD on what the uptick is. We are going to be able to offer childcare as well as a family meal as part of the evening for the family, and are looking at having it at both a north side school location as well as a south side school as well. And then looking at evening weekday hours plus also a Saturday option as well.
Okay, yeah, you answered the question, because I was going to ask what we were doing to support families to be able to attend. So I think like feeding them and childcare are, typical things in behavioral settings. And then someone else, you mentioned that we have 3 people processing intake applications. And I know Dr. Adams mentioned just the shortage of staff. I was just wondering, do you have an ideal number of how many people you think would be necessary to meet the need of intake the way that we need it?
You mean like a dream? This is
I guess a mix between dream and realism. But
I
if there's not
know
enough.
I've been getting a lot of calls from the media about the moratorium being lifted on housing. Right now, I don't want to panic, but I think we have enough social workers, counselors, FCS. And I think if or when it becomes a problem, then I can see having a conversation about it. But I will say the social workers, counselors, FCS, and even the nurses have been very, very supportive with getting students identified and just referring for support.
Okay, thank you. And then this is probably a question for either of you. I'm sure both of you have run into this a little bit. I'm sure we have some specific parts that are just focusing on destigmatizing it so that people feel comfortable taking advantage of the services that we have available and not feeling ashamed, or you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Yes. So since 2017, we've been offering a 4-part workshop for caregivers around trauma. So we do basic like trauma 101, but then from that, the supplemental workshops to that are how to be an advocate for your child, how to take care of yourself so that you can be a supported caregiver, and then how to work as a team and who is on your team, who's on your child's team, what does that look like? And then how do you kind of manage all of the behaviors around trauma and what you might be seeing with your child. So we really are working at kind of getting the word out there. And I think that even by calling it coping skills, changing some of the strategy around the language that we use as well, and just making it more commonplace that we have these conversations. And like I said, I think that that is one thing that is a positive result of COVID, despite all of the other horrible tragedies, has been this idea that it's okay to talk about this because now it's a shared experience, right? It's not anything because of who I am or what I've done. This is just something that we're all subjected to. And I think that this has kind of created that awareness that everyone experiences stress. Anxiety is something that's normal for a lot of folks. And so just making it more commonplace.
For sure. And I'm almost done. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
So around the tier 3 therapy, I was just curious, are the timeframes in the sessions that are allotted, is that something that's decided by the clinical assessment? Do we have any restrictions like on our end that are currently in place due to like financial reasons or anything like that?
We don't. We just follow a typical billing model, though, with it being 1 50-minute session per week is what we would strive for. And then we allow the clinician to set their
clinical
timeframes. Yeah, in terms of what are their clinical goals, what's their time frame for it. And then that obviously can be impacted by how often a child is at school. And so sometimes we see that there might be a lag time with a break or the 2 weeks in the winter. But we always try to get right back to that clinical
So it would be
schedule.
possible if they needed it throughout the school year and throughout the summer that it could be like, it's going to be, that is coming from a clinical assessment. That's what I wanted to know, that it wasn't us putting any limitations.
Yes, with the
challenges
exception
there.
of summer, just because staff,
10 months.
yep, the
Yeah.
10-month contract.
Okay, and then I know that you mentioned you guys are in relationship to the disciplinary process with these services. Are you guys, is it, I know we how unhoused and those type of needs. Are you also, you get triggered, if it's a teacher or someone from this, or you keep constantly noticing this kid is getting detention, or you're tied into that process?
Yes, we should be tied into that process through our student support team approach. So that team should be meeting about children who have any sort of presenting concerns, attendance, academics, behavior, basic needs, community referrals, whatever it might be. That student support team process should be capturing that. And through our review of attendance data, that would call our attention to that, but then also just having your pulse on what's going on in your building, who are the students who seem to be needing the most, doing those check-ins with staff, and then also classroom observations is an expectation as well, so that we are in the classroom seeing what is happening.
Okay, yeah, I was classroom observations. What I was looking for. And then I know you mentioned that you were in early conversations around Zoom updates for the tutoring services that Ms. Cousins asked you about earlier. Are you running into any specific challenges with that, or like how is that process going? Or just in the early stages?
It's in the early stages, and many services don't start until like early September, once the students are back. And so we don't get to know the need until they complete the needs assessment form.
And would it be the teachers that would be?
No, so we hired certified tutors. And usually at the principals' meetings, I will seek out tutors if they need extra support, especially if they have a large homeless population.
Okay, all right. And then I think one of my last questions is just around, I know you talked a lot about suicide and risk assessment. Do we have things specific for LGBTQ students and staff? Like, are we doing anything to kind of make sure that they are aware that those services are available for them? Or even like we mentioned small therapy for grief and trauma. Is there anything specific for that part of the community that we know has those higher rates?
Yes. So some of our schools have a GSA inside the school itself, the Alliance, but also social workers, school counselors are aware of the community-based resources. We do engage in professional development around that population, as well as some of our Saturday workshops will be specific for students and caregivers that identify in the LGBTQIA population. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Is there no other questions from the board? Thank you. The next two presentations will be the 2021-22 restart. I want to provide the board with a last update. Most of the information that I will be providing to you, you've already seen, already aware of, but it is also helpful to bring this before the community with less than 2 weeks before school actually starts with students returning. I basically redesigned this presentation to lay it out by district, what parents need to do, what schools need to do, what the guidelines are. And basically, the district has created an infection disease plan that the city of St. Louis has approved. School plans have also been submitted as of the 6th of August. We have also established a process by which each school keeps and maintains accurate records. We have a contact tracers at the district office. I think we have right now 4 contact tracers responsible for helping us support contacting information, collecting information relative to students who might be infected with the virus, such that we have that information. So that's the accurate records, in addition to posting that information on our website. Obviously, we comply with the Missouri statute, as you see there, 167.181. We conduct daily health temperature screenings that persons come in the building to do, as well as we will have questions, the same questions that we put in place last school year in all of our schools as students walk in. Minimize contact and social mixing during school hours. We will work to try to make sure that we have directions where kids can walk up and down. In other words, minimizing the contact. It's going to be impossible to keep kids from contacting each other, but we'll do our best to minimize that. Consult and obtain from the City of St. Louis and Department of Health prior to planning any school assemblies. At this point in time, all of those kinds of activities are on hold. We're not having any of those large group kind of activities. We work with the St. Louis Department of Health to ensure COVID testing and vaccinations, as we saw what occurred on Saturday. And I indicate the number of students and parents who were participating in that activity. Isolation areas will be in place in every single school, manned by staff as needed. And we're also working to make sure that students can have breakfast in the classroom or lunch in the classroom. That depends on the size of the school, the capacity of the school to navigate that. It is not a requirement. I want the board and the public to know that we have multiple mitigation strategies in place. So it's not just one thing that will determine if students are going to be in contact. The second slide deals with temperature and health screenings again for visitors and anyone entering the building. In-person field trips during the fall semester are on hold at this point in time. We're not pushing any kind of field trips, so we're going to restrict those. Protocols for buses, we work with our bus company, try to make sure that they are wearing masks, providing masks to students as they come on, equipping classrooms and communal areas with hand sanitizing stations, installing hand washing stations as needed, disinfecting high point areas, using additional measures such as foggers and sprayers, and all of those kinds of things that we purchased last year that we'll be putting in place this school year. Every school won't have these items, but in most places, the operations manager determines what schools need to have these materials to support disinfecting and cleaning the school. Facilities will coordinate scheduling and look at deep cleaning. If a classroom is identified as having students or staff that might have the virus, we go back in and do a deep cleaning prior to anyone going back into that classroom. We also try to keep students together in groups. And so we are asking staff to keep a list of students who are in a group, whether that's at lunch, whether that's on the yard. We are trying to restrict the large groups on the yard, only keeping kids together who are connected in a classroom or some other kind of relationship, as opposed to students coming from the entire school and being together. Allow time for hand washing, we're building that into the schedule and listening and limiting the number of students in any kind of area. Here it speaks to the bathroom, but we're talking about any area. In terms of student guidelines, we're complying with the governance of the Missouri revised statute as indicated here in terms of immunizations. We are allowing students 30 days after the beginning of school year. As a matter of fact, it's the last Wednesday in September. We give students an opportunity to be immunized up until the last Wednesday in September. So we don't automatically deny students who are not immunized. We work with nurses and social workers to get them to those places that they can get that. We plan on having vans to come to do some of those as well. Mr. Brown is working previously with the city to do that. So we will not be restricting students if they don't have their records completed until after the last Wednesday in September. 3 feet of distancing is a minimum that we're trying to put in place in every school. Again, there will be situations in classrooms where that will not be able to be done, but the notion is mask wearing and contact tracing and all of those kinds of things will assist. Minimizing contact, as I said before, face covering for every single adult and every single student, and that's even on the bus as well. And staff notifying us when students are feeling ill. Once we know that, we can obviously send students home and get them to be tested. And students will be provided instruction online and in person if we have to do any kind of quarantining. Dr. Smith met with me on yesterday along with his person responsible for managing this, Dr. Mitchell, and we have a plan in place to address if quarantining takes place, how we're going to support students. In terms of staff guidelines, and this is a little bit more nuanced than it has been in the past, obviously face covering, staff with medical conditions obviously will be prohibited from having to wear face coverings, and we will have medical documentation from the doctor to say why. Staff members should assist with the cleaning efforts by cleaning and disinfecting communal areas as well. Obviously, our custodians will be doing that, but in the classroom, sometimes teachers will have to assist in terms of doing that. Health screenings, as I indicated before, for everyone coming in the building. All staff has to be tested before school starts on the 23rd. We're collecting that information and uploading vaccination information into a portal, so we'll know exactly before the 23rd. Every staff has to be tested throughout the entire district. That's custodians, that's central office, that's myself, that's everyone has to be tested prior to returning on the 23rd. And we're also asking everybody to upload their information to let us know if they're vaccinated or not vaccinated, because that will assist in terms of quarantining. Vaccination status, as I indicated before, that's the next bullet. And we want to adhere to board policy 4623, which means that if a staff member is vaccinated, is not showing any symptoms, and comes in contact with another person who has the virus, that person will be allowed to continue to work. If that person is not vaccinated, that person will be at home for the next 10 days, and that person will have to use their own bank of time to accommodate that quarantining. The last one is parents and visitors guideline. Instruction is to keep children at home if they're ill. And we're asking parents, if children come down with any kind of illness, that you keep the child home. Visitors will be limited to in-school buildings and will be required to wear masks. We will also likely, with some of those partners, Dr. Brown and I had this conversation, to request that we also have vaccination information for them as well. So we will be collecting some of that based upon the partner relationships that we have. And parents and guardians coming to pick up or drop off students will be asked to stay outside the building in designated areas as opposed to coming inside of the building. So those are the guidelines that are in place right now. These are not, there should not be anything brand new here for the board and for the public, with the exception of staff has been notified in terms of the quarantining and the use of their own time, which the board passed that policy, I want to say in March of April of 2020. Any questions from the board relative to the restart document?
So Dr. Adams, there's just one line that I want to ask you to clarify, and you kind of touched on it, but on slide 4, when you say students will be provided instruction online and in person, just to be clear, all students are going to be in person unless you enroll in the Edmentum program.
That is 100% correct.
And so what you're referring to is there will be a
Quarantine.
backup. So if a student is quarantined and the class is still in session, they'll have some support online.
That is 100% correct. What we're looking at right now, what we're still finessing, is that the kid will have an opportunity because the teachers are going to be taped, and that lesson will be put on the website for the teachers for the student to watch it, and then the teacher will provide some support. We're looking to pay teachers additional dollars to provide that support as they upload that information and tape it. So yes, that is exactly what we're looking at, because that's a short-term measure. That's likely to be anywhere from 5 to 10 days. In the Edmentum program, that's an entire quarter. That's 9 weeks that kid is going to be online. We are also looking at, and this still is being worked on, that we're still looking for some increased support in the Edmentum program, depending upon the number of families. But for the most part, it's 100% self-driven online, but we are looking based upon the uptick in the virus with the variants that we might increase what that looks like to support families in a different kind of way than we did last year.
And I think in previous plans, if you enroll in Edmentum, you could switch at the quarter. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so will you still be enrolled in a home school?
We are looking at, and then there's so many different angles
Sorry.
here. No, not a problem at all. Because the vaccine is not necessarily for students under 12, if that changes, we may pivot to allow families who are in Edmentum to pull out of Edmentum prior to the 9 weeks, such that the child could get back in school if the issue of being safe and secure because of the vaccine is an issue. So while right now it's 9 weeks, if something happens and the vaccine is available in early September for kids under age 12, and the parent decides to get the vaccine and wants to send their child to school, we'll back off that recommendation for 9 weeks and allow them to be engaged into school likely earlier than a 9-week period of time. You're welcome.
Dr. Adams, my question is about air quality in the schools. For those schools where you can open the windows in the classroom, have we purchased air purifiers or what are we going to do about that?
So we have been working with our consultant who does our lead. And we are also assessing all of the air qualities in all of our buildings. And we'll be looking at providing not necessarily air purifiers. We're actually taking information about what's in the air in every single building. And we're looking to put some things in place to address how to make sure that the air is at the quality it needs to be based on some standards that have been put in place. And so I can give the board a better idea school by school. We've tested it in 2 schools that we feel very comfortable with right now, and we have some data to say what that is. There's some schools that are great, don't have any air quality issues. There's some schools, quite frankly, those schools that are closed schools, believe it or not, that are much more problematic that we're looking at and are looking to expend some dollars to put systems in place. They won't necessarily be air purifiers, as you indicated, but there is a systems that we're looking to try to remediate the air in certain buildings. So right now we are piloting 2 right now before school gets started. The belief is that we'll on a rotating basis be looking at every single school and putting some of those things in place. And quite frankly, some of the ESSER dollars are likely to be used to try to address some of those concerns. But I'll give the board a much deeper analysis at the next work session, school by school. You're welcome.
Dr. Adams, are we coordinating messaging? We're hearing from you tonight. It may be something different on the website, the district website, and it may be something different at the building level. So are we going to pay particular attention to messaging so that we all have the same information, not just the board, but the community as well?
The information I'm sharing is on the district's website. We provided the principals on Friday with an FAQ that lays out everything that I'm saying right now. Mrs. Willis is behind me, and I want to stay positive that what I'm providing to you, FAQ has already gone out. It's also gone out in a digest, as well as the the FAQ that Mr. Brown put out coming from the city of St. Louis. The city of St. Louis provided us a document on yesterday that I signed off on, as well as all of the charters signed off on. That is also going to be put on their website that is consistent with what we're saying here as well. The nuances may be a word here, a word there, but for the most part, Dr. Roberts, it is consistent.
Any other questions?
I'll pivot at this time. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to clarify for the policy 4623. If a teacher has had the vaccination and then becomes in close contact with the person who's infected, that teacher will continue to work, or will that teacher go on quarantine, but we cover that cost?
If someone is vaccinated, comes in close contact with someone, is not showing any symptoms, they can continue to come to work. If they're showing symptoms, then they have to quarantine. And during that period of time, we would ask them to go get tested as well. The last presentation is a ARP ESSER3 update. I want to reference a couple of documents first, so that the board is aware of them. You have a document that is actually, it says DESA ESSER3 plan draft due August the 23rd. So that is the actual plan that we will be submitting to the state on the 23rd of August. You also have a brochure that says re-engage, reimagine, and innovate. And this is a draft as well that will be posted on our website. Again, it's a draft because we have 2 weeks before we submit everything. So that is a secondary document that will allow the public to know exactly what we're doing. It will be in a brochures form. It's a draft right now, but after we get this sent to the state, it will be in a brochures form that we can pass around to the community so people will know exactly what we're doing with the dollars. So I want to show you those two actual documents. One is the actual plan that we submitted to the state, and one is a brochure. Now I walk through the ESSER document at this point in time. Again, a lot of the language you've already seen, so I'm going to kind of concentrate on those areas that have not necessarily been put before the public. You know about the committee. You know that we engaged and did a survey. You actually got that survey information. You also know that there was a wide range of stakeholders, and those are listed on this first slide here. In July, we did the survey. We surveyed the community. You can see that a survey in May, 2,900 respondents, and in July, we did another survey. As of this presentation, approximately 180 respondents. I think as of today, because the day it closes, there were 214 additional responses that came, and those responses were favorable to the plan as it stays. And as I did last time, I'll also upload and provide you with those responses. Obviously, the impact of COVID, and this is what the plan is looking to address. All of the areas that you see here are areas that we are looking to lean into. Students with disabilities, ESOL, children experiencing homelessness, which you just heard just now, children and youth in foster care, low income backgrounds. These were the areas that the ESSER dollars were supposed to target in terms of population. The next slide frames our theory of ESSER plan, re-engaging our learners, investing in our staff, supporting the whole child, and expanding 21st century schools. And that's really more about facilities than anything else. Some priorities: supporting the whole child. If we implement a multi-tier system of support for students with an emphasis on trauma-informed practices, and we spent over an hour tonight talking about that, and that was a really important piece in unfinished learning, then we are ensuring that each student is provided learning experiences that results in them achieving at a high level. The real key here is that it's a real wraparound service approach. Obviously, trauma as well as the student learning component as well. Expanding 21st century schools. This is really about the air quality that Ms. Jones talked about, and refashioning our schools such that we have the equipment and supplies there to support what students need. And then investing in our staff, which is really about professional development, really about providing the learning that our staff needs to have in terms of being ready to provide the kind of services that our students need. ESSA 3, re-engaging our learners, supporting the whole child again, acceleration over remediation, interventions that focus on grade level standards, trauma-informed support, tiered learning, literacy support, similar to the tiered trauma support you heard, equitable spaces for students. That's about STEM labs. That's about the mitigation strategies in terms of air quality, has already been said. And lastly, investing in our staff. We can't spend enough money in terms of getting our staff up to speed in terms of what needs to be done in the trauma area, but also in the area of learning loss, if you want to call it that, which is the terminology that the state uses. This basic plan framework talks about providing, expanding, and enhancing, and it lists the areas of resources for investing, for expanding initiatives around establishing meaningful support for students and enhancing resources and investing across our district to ensure our students are ready for the 21st century. This gives some example, and Ms. Marietta really spoke to it as it relates to reading, and this is a similar kind of analogy here. Universal supports all students will receive the opportunity to purchase supplemental literacy materials aligned with our core curriculum. For example, schools will be able to purchase a supplemental literacy program from a list of approved vendors. But targeted support might be qualifying schools will be able to provide virtual and in-person interventions to students in K-2 grades who are struggling in reading. This is just an example. Overall, everybody gets the same thing, and then targeted drilling down based on the population of students getting targeted resources based on being tier 2 and tier 3. This is just an example to show you what the differences will be in dollars will be spent to support tier 1, but also tier 3 and obviously tier 2 and tier 3. So let's go to the slide that probably has the greatest interest in terms of how the funding is going to take place. 70% of the funding will go toward direct services for all learners. Universal supports, as I said before, evidence-based academic and social emotional resources and teacher support administered by the district. This includes resources such as curriculum, interventions, technology, educational technology, professional learning. Targeted supports, dedicated resources and additional support for specific student populations, special education, ESOL, students in transition, foster care, targeted populations, and then school-specific spending, direct student resources, school and classroom level support to ensure a standard level of technology, innovation, learning space options, and school-specific autonomy is what the third bullet looks at. So it's very specific school spending that might be based upon what a need of a school might be. 25% facility improvement. I won't go through all of this again. This is really about the same conversation that was asked about earlier around what we're going to be putting in schools based on some facility challenges that schools have. And Dr. Roberts asked this question at the last board meeting. The question was, I want to make sure that dollars could be spent in this area. They can be. We can spend dollars around facilities to support the air quality issues that we're looking to do. And 5% around professional learning, a comprehensive, sustained, job-embedded and collaborative approach to improving teacher and leader effectiveness in raising student achievement. It's not enough to provide the funding for direct supports for students if teachers and staff are not prepared to turnkey that into turnkey that in a way that it needs to be turnkeyed. And obviously, we know we have to unlearn and learn, as Dr. Smith says, new ways of providing services to students. So Mrs. Banks framed for you the challenges of ESSER 3 rather. So it is our intent to spend all $46 million next school year to support students. And so we have wide flexibility with ESSER 2, and you can see some of the kinds of things and the actual plan that we submitting to DESA gives you a better breakdown of what those dollars look like in that application. But this says $46 million. We will have to do RFPs, we will have to do contracts and other kinds of things to spend these dollars over the next year in this space. Year 2 and year 3, which will be 2022 and 2023, we're looking to spend $50 million each year to cover those areas. Why are we delaying not spending those dollars now? We need to make sure that we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's as it relates to this equity challenge that Mrs. Banks framed, because if we spend the dollars and don't get them approved, we lose those dollars. So we want to make sure that we spend a year making sure that we're dotting the i's and crossing the t's and get the approval from DESE as well as from the feds in terms of how we spend those dollars. So we have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we spend these dollars and what years. The state doesn't say you have to spend all of them equally over 3 years. It just says the dollars have to be spent. So I won't go through all of the details in the next steps because the applications you have can give you a lot more guidance in terms of that area. Lastly, and this is what Ms. Banks indicated, resources will be allocated on district-wide initiatives and school-level initiatives based on the equity standard as established by the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education under the maintenance of equity provision. And that only applies to ESSA 3. It does not apply to ESSA 2. So that's why we're looking to spend the ESSA $2 next year and the ESSA $3 the following year and the following year after that. So lastly, August 23rd, we have to turn the application in. Fall 2021, we start the work in terms of identifying how dollars are going to go to schools. Schools are going to get a certain amount of dollars. Departments are going to get dollars. And we're also tracking ESSA funds as well. As I said before, Dr. Crapo will be the person responsible for tracking the dollars, but not only tracking, implementing some things in place. And I'll give you one example of why we need time to put some of these kinds of things in place. It is clear to me that it is likely that we will be spending a larger percentage of dollars than we had in the past with extra service because kids will be getting tutoring. Extra service is a master for the district right now with the limited dollars that we're spending. So we have to make sure that we have a system established that's coherent enough that schools get the information, staff can be aware of what that information is, and we are able to compensate teachers fairly on with a timeline. So right now, we may delay, somebody might do extra service in September and not receive the dollars for those services until December, because it's a process-driven, it's process-driven. We have to make sure all our people sign things. We have the social security numbers. We have all of that information. We have to put some better systems in place to make sure that we can accommodate turning around the extra service funds for teachers as they provide these services to kids. So there are a lot of glitches and things that we have to put in place because we have to make sure that we have the systems built inside of the district to make sure that we can accommodate some of these things. We've already talked about our procurement process. Our procurement process, rightfully so, protects the district in a lot of ways. The question becomes, how can we expedite some of these procurement processes such that we can get some of the supplies into schools and also address some of the facilities concerns by not waiting 3, 4, 5 months. So there's some work that we have to do on the back end. And that's why the notion of utilizing these dollars over the next year is going to be critical, that we look at how our processes support the utilization of these kinds of dollars. And so we're working on that. We won't do anything until after we submit the application on the 23rd. It's my understanding it will be a quick turnaround for them to approve it. And then we'll be putting those things into place in the fall semester such that the dollars can be received by schools and impacting student achievement as early as possible. Questions that the board might have? A lot of information, I know, but I thought it was important for the board to have as much as possible as it relates to it.
Dr. Adams, in this formula by DESE on the equity standard, when it says maintain minimum levels of funding and staffing for its high poverty schools, is that funding per student or funding per building?
That is the question that we're asking.
Okay.
I think that's the real question. As Ms. Banks just indicated, as we have dwindling population, what they're basically saying is, if you have a school right now, you're spending $4 million on that school, and that population goes down by half, you still have to spend $4 million on that school.
I guess that's the question that I want to make sure we're clear on, that we have to continue to spend the same gross amount at the school versus the per student form, because the population can fall and still spend the same amount of funds if it's per student.
That is what we are trying to nuance. That's that. We have a call with the Secretary of Education at 11 o'clock on Thursday with all districts that are part of the Council of Great City Schools to get some further information, because it's really not clear. In some cases, it said that you could ask for a waiver. That waiver has to be approved. We might, that's why we have this year period of time for ESSA 3. We may be requesting a waiver, And hopefully we'll get some approval before we start spending the dollars.
That maintenance of effort question is plaguing every district across the nation.
Yes, it is. It's a real challenge.
A couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
I had an opportunity to read the directions before the application. And so if you want to make a note on page 3, it talks about using the ESSER 3 funds to cover bills back to 2020.
Yes, we are aware of that. At this point in time, we don't want to do that. It's a journaling nightmare from a auditing perspective. And so we have discussed that, Dr. Roberts, and there may be some opportunities to do that, but as Ms. Banks has indicated in her meeting with me, it's not something we prefer to do.
Okay. So we're keeping the ESSER funds separate from the general operating budget and likewise.
We have to keep an accounting of,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
I just have a couple quick questions. Earlier, in a couple meetings ago, you had mentioned an opportunity to participate, and I don't remember the name, but some sort of foundation that was offering free services to school districts. Were you able to do that?
We had our first phone call with the Wallace Foundation last Wednesday. I've met with the superintendents, Dr. Williams met with another group, but yes, we started that last Wednesday. Once a week, we'll be having, once every 2 weeks, we'll have conversations with them around how they're using those dollars with some creative ideas. So yes, sir, we did start that.
And in terms of sort of the larger portion, the 70, I've lost my page,
70%.
70%.
Mhm.
If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it sounds like a lot of that will be to ask our current teachers and our current staff, and compensating them for it, obviously, to do extra work. And I guess the buzzword of the night is capacity. Do we have enough people to be able to do that? Because we're also asking them to do the additional reading and the literacy programs as a result of the consolidation plan and the state funding. I guess that's just my concern, and maybe you don't know.
What we are looking to do is, I think there are 3 areas that are going to be impacted, to your point. Additional extra service for staff, materials, additional materials and supplies, technology as well. And I think schools are going to have the ability to determine how best to use those. If they can leverage their staff in a way that's creative and those dollars can be used for that, they'll be given an opportunity. But we plan on right now providing a lot of dollars at the school level and let them tell us how they want to use those dollars. So if they can leverage their staff and use them in a unique way, they'll have the extra dollars to do so. We won't necessarily manage that in a way that we would do right now, but we still have to work through that. But you are correct. There's another idea I'm gonna bring back to the board in the next meeting after having some other conversation to try to incentivize what that might look like.
And maybe you're not prepared yet to talk about this, but I'm intrigued by the last bullet point, pilot group of schools to reimagine. Do you have an idea of what that would look like? We've talked previously about community schools. Is that something along those lines?
That's all of the above. Yes, sir. We want to take this opportunity for the next 3 years to look at some of our schools that have some of our greatest challenges and think about how we staff those schools, think about what the school day looks like, think about what the curriculum looks like. And so not ready to kind of talk about it right now, is to your point, but I would suspect in September we'll be coming back because we want the school leaders at the table as well. We want them engaged. We want the community engaged in a real way around what that might look like for a particular school. So yes, sir.
And would that be something the hope that we develop this year to implement?
Yes, sir.
Next school year?
That is exactly right. That's exactly what we're looking to plan for one full year. Right now, just to give you some idea, we have 7 principals who are in a redesigned program. And this was before knowing anything about ESSER. These principals, along with their staff, were having an opportunity to go across the country, if they could travel again, to visit schools and then come back with a redesign of what they want to do in their schools. And so they'll meet with parents and all the like, but they're looking at schools across the country and coming back to say, I want to redesign XYZ school based upon what I've seen, what the research says. We will pay them to do that. We're actually paying them. We're covering all of the travel. We're also going to pay them with an executive coach to work with them to look at what that school looks like. And so we are investing, our foundation and Parson Blewett have both leaned in to provide dollars to do that, not even looking at ESSER funds as a way to do that. So there's 7 schools right now that are part of this pilot that is taking off to look to do that. So I would suspect that it will be likely some of those 7 schools that are looking to do that. They applied during the summer. We accepted them. We reviewed, there were 10 schools that applied. We looked at 7. And so some of those schools likely will be primed to be pilot for the next 2 or 3 years.
And that's something that we did in-house with support from the foundation.
From the foundation and Parson Blewett. And this was done in January, February, before we knew anything about the kind of dollars we were going to get, because we knew we needed to look at something different, similar to what the CPN is. But this is a smaller version that we are owning and looking to do without looking outside with an outside board and that kind of stuff.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Just for information, the Department of Education frequently asked questions about the equity, fiscal equity. According to their answer to question number 26, it is per pupil, which it actually is very helpful.
Yes,
That
it
is
is.
per pupil.
Thank you. I'm
Doc-
sorry.
One more question.
Yes,
Can
ma'am.
you speak to DESE's role in giving prior approval to some capital outlay?
Not following you, Dr. You're talking about for the ESSER funds?
I'm talking about the ESSER funds. You were thinking about doing something to our buildings, and there's some permission we'll have to get from DESE. Can you speak to that?
The permission is in the application. So we're going to submit the application, and on the 23rd, they'll give us feedback in terms of what we put in the application. So we're not talking about replacing windows and doors. We're talking air quality, basically. Air and water are the 2 areas that we're looking at.
I had just one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Some of the professional development training, is some of that focused on cultural competency?
Yes, ma'am, it is. As a matter of fact, on the 27th of September, we have a group coming in to work with our schools in that space. And they were looking to pilot several schools with a Crown Apple and Cobb, who are 2 authors who are working with us over the next year in this space.
One final question. Will we align any of this ESSER funding for the goals that we stepped out for the district for this year? It's a lot of paper here, but there's nothing really specific to the district's goals and the budget line items that go with it, the budget that goes along with it.
Everything we're spending money on will be around reading, math, college and career. Obviously, STEM has a great focus around math and reading deeply. The board has already approved the new reading adoption. We're reading teachers in every single classroom. Dr. Smith is working on what the rollout of that looks like in every single school, with individual reading plans for students who are reading below grade level. So yes, ma'am, dollars will be spent in that space, and also aligned to tutoring around reading and math and a high school, college and career. That's why the board spent 1.6 million for the internship program. So yes, ma'am.
I'm glad to hear you speak to it tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. Ask the board to look at the consent agenda at this point in time, Dr. Roberts.
Yes, sir. The board has had an opportunity to review the consent agenda, and I would like to get a motion to approve it as written. 08-10-2101 through 09, I'm sorry. 08-10-2113.
I move that we approve the August 10th, 2021 consent agenda, items 08-10-2101 through 08-10-2113.
Any question, any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Williams?
Ms. Sonier? Yes. Ms. Cousins? Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Ms. Fowle?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Board member reports. Ms. Sonia, would you like to begin?
Sorry, do we have the calendar? Is this an action item?
Yes, there is a walk-on item tonight. When Mrs. Williams contacted me 2 days ago to indicate that we had some discussion around the calendar in February or March, but we failed to actually vote for it. When she was doing the minutes, she could not find that the board voted on it. And so I'm asking that the board vote on the calendar. This was at the 3/9/2021 meeting. Obviously, some of the members who were here were not in place at that time. We had a lot of robust discussion around it, but we did not actually take a vote. So it is required that we do vote for the calendar, albeit late. And so I'm asking the board to approve the 2021-22 calendar as presented to you here.
I move that we approve the 2021-2022 calendar as presented.
Second. Ms. Sonia,
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Ms. Fowler,
Yes.
Ms. Fowle.
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Dr. Roberts. Motion passed.
On to board member reports. Ms. Sonia.
I just wanted to say that I thought the Safe Start celebration event went really, really well. I was glad to go. I love that we were offering on-site vaccinations. I love that the Department of Health and the Teachers Union was there. And it was such an amazing, amazing turnout. So I just wanted to thank everyone who was involved in putting that together, as well as the previous board members who were involved in helping us provide supplies for scholars and families as well.
I agree. It was an absolutely astounding event. The number of parents and vendors who showed up to make it such a success. So much so that I've been asked by parents how they can get I Love St. Louis Public Schools t-shirt.
I'll have a recommendation for you tomorrow in our meeting.
Ms. Sonia, is that it? All right, Ms. Cousins.
I have nothing.
Matt.
I have a committee report, if that's okay. The next meeting of the Legislation and Advocacy Committee will be, I'm looking over to make sure I have the right date, August 18th. Our goal this next meeting is to review suggestions for our top 3 to 4 priorities based upon the suggestions from last year's legislative platform. So we'll be discussing that.
Can I ask a question? Matt, did we go with Wednesdays for the day? Because I know you were deliberating between Monday and Wednesday.
We moved it this month because of back to school. So we're trying to find a date that kind of accommodated as much as we possibly can. So I hope it works for everybody, but we were kind of running out of time finding a date. So we'll get hopefully into a cycle, but because of back to school, it sort of threw us off.
Regina.
On your, at your spaces, you have this folder, and these are bylaw changes that actually we're supposed to go to just the governance committee as we review these board bylaws. So they're just recommendations, but the governance committee has not discussed them yet, so.
Donna.
I don't have an actual report at this time, but I would just like to welcome all of our students back to school and just say that I really appreciate you and appreciate the parents and staff as well. And I want to have a request of the community to please, please come out and make sure that our streets are safe for our students as they travel back to school, however they might get there. Please just have an extra eye out for our kids wherever they are. Thank you.
Natalie.
No report at this time.
I'd like to follow up on a request for professional development that was put before the board at our last meeting. I'd like to extend that opportunity to the other members of the board. And it's not until November. And so if your schedules will allow, it would be a wonderful professional development opportunity for the full board. I am requesting permission to attend the MSBA conference in Kansas City on November 4th through the 7th.
I'd make a motion to approve Dr. Roberts' professional development request.
And to include any other board member who would want to participate. Thank you.
Second.
Ms. Sonier,
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Ms. Fowler,
Yes.
Ms. Vowell,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Dr. Roberts.
Yes.
Motion passed.
I want to remind my fellow board members that if you have anything that you would like to see included in the agenda, please send that information to me and or to the superintendent. A brief reminder for new board members. There's a board member refresher training that's required by state law, and it's online training and or in person. So if you would just check your email for that information. And I'd like to end by saying I'm excited to see a segment on the board's website about have you had an out of this world experience at St. Louis Public Schools? And if so, please be sure to take advantage of it. And so we want to control the message of the district. And with that, I'd like to thank the members of the public. I'm going to call on Hopi Fink to come forward at this time.
Thank you. Hello, board members and Superintendent Adams. Is this on? Ooh, fancy. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Hopi Fink, and I'm a staff attorney in the Education Justice Program at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. Our program represents low-income clients across Missouri and works to address the root causes of education inequity. I'm here to bring your attention to an issue that was touched on briefly earlier this meeting, and one that's of the utmost concern to our client communities as we all prepare for our third academic year in this global pandemic. And that is charging families fees and fines related to district-issued technology. I'm glad to hear that SLPS seems to be taking some steps to reduce fees for families, but we do still have some questions about the plan that was proposed earlier today. And I want to bring your attention to how critical this issue is for families right now with outstanding charges. By my calculation, there are almost 700 invoices that have not been fulfilled yet. When the SLPS board last updated its policies related to equipment and technology use, as far as we can tell, it was 2001. Please think for a moment about how the equipment needed for learning in schools and for thriving in our society has changed in the last 2 decades. At many points in the last year and a half, the only way that students in SLPS could access education was through a laptop, tablet, computer, or other tech device and an internet connection. Missouri's Constitution guarantees free public schools for the gratuitous instruction of all persons in the state. Courts have interpreted this provision to mean that districts cannot charge fees, even de minimis fees, for anything related to courses for academic credit. DESE issued guidance in August 2020, recognizing that charging families fees associated with technology during the pandemic could be unlawful. Yet as we head into a new school year where technology will continue to be integral to education, many families in SLPS are facing insurmountable tech fines that threaten to pose barriers to education. For example, one of our clients is a rising 7th grader whose family is being charged $320 for a lost tablet that the child never even got to use. Her mother, primarily a Spanish speaker, was forced to sign a technology agreement that she did not understand because no interpretation services were offered when she went to pick up the tablet in August 2020. The tablet was left at the school building that very day. Despite being assured by district staff not to worry, the family was never given another device. And then they were slapped with this fine that they cannot afford. Virtually all families, regardless of their English reading abilities, feel they have no option but to sign the district's technology agreement, which binds them to high fines even for stolen devices, if they want their students to access education. When we became aware of the systemic issue, we requested information in April 2021 about the district's practice of charging tech fees so we could understand who it's most affecting. The district has still not responded to our sunshine request, but we have good reason to suspect that tech fees are disproportionately affecting students of color, low-income students, and students with disabilities. The time has come to move the district into a new era of technology access that incorporates full, complete insurance for every device into the district's own budget. We urge the members of the board to do all in your power to stop this unlawful practice of requiring families to pay fees related to accessing education through technology, to waive all existing technology fines for families who are unable to pay, and lastly, to ensure that the district pays the full costs of tech and insurance moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fink. The next speaker, Mitch Pearson.
Good evening. My name is Mitch Pearson. Thank you. I'm the founder of the Montessori-based Urban Farm School. And before I go forward, I picked this out of the garden today. And I was thinking, if we had urban farm schools during the pandemic, what could have been different? How could we have done better, fared better, even saved lives? I came here from Kansas in 2016, to study the Montessori process. I had the opportunity, the God-given opportunity, to study with Dr. Annette Haynes at the Montessori Lab School. I went around the region and studied both public schools and private schools, Montessori and non-Montessori. And what I found out, being a farmer, growing up on the farm, that they go hand in hand. Montessori has been proven to be child development sensitive. And so is agriculture, farming. We do this even today. We have children, and we work in different schools and different youth programs. When we put a garden system around them, they start really getting involved in the science. They want to know about the worms, about the soil, about the seed, how it grows. That's such a powerful tool for our children, particularly underserved children in the neighborhoods there. So what we've always talked about, I really spent a lot of my time at Dunbar Elementary School. And what we did there, we started a science program. We started gardening. We have a farm in Spanish Lake. We've had them come out to the farm and use that system and start piquing that child's interest. So I'm standing here today to keep talking about and keep getting that message out. Montessori-based urban farm schooling, it works. There's a farm to school network. There's a Montessori network around this country. We need to tap into it. And this is a great opportunity for St. Louis Public School to just take a look at that and see how can we get our children from where they are now to what I call a preschool to Princeton pipeline. How can we get our kids reaching that third grade reading level? Thank you.
Thank you. We've come to the end of our board meeting. May I get a motion to close?
Move to adjourn.
Ms. Williams?
Ms. Sonier? Yes. Ms. Cousins?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Ms. Vowell? Yes. Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?